April is Autism Acceptance Month. You may have known it as Autism Awareness Month, but the name has recently changed. We are way beyond needing to just be aware of people with autism. People with autism need to be integrated into our daily lives, as well as our community, our society, as much as possible. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, it's Dr. David. So as you may know, I've been working with kids with autism and now people with autism, adults with autism as they've become older for 25 years now. I'm a board certified pediatrician and autism has been my passion for all of this time. Now, as an aside, if you do like these types of videos and you want to support our work, please become a member of our Patreon. This allows us to support these types of projects that I do here so I can keep on making these types of videos. But as far as people with autism, today we're going to be talking about why this name change happened. We're going to talk about neurodiversity as a whole, inclusiveness, and support. Now, the first time I saw a patient with autism goes back to my pediatric residency. This was approximately 1995. And at the time, the number of people with autism was about 1 in 500 was the numbers. And we were told after there was a kid who was admitted for an illness but was a child with autism, hey, everybody come down to the pediatric floor to the fourth floor to see this child with autism. You may never see a child with autism again. And of course, that was a very poor prediction. And we now know that the incidence of children with autism is now 1 in 35. So in my career, it's changed from 1 in 500 to 1 in 35. And of course, part of it is due to more awareness. Part of it is due to proper diagnosis, but there's also something going on. I've talked on this channel over and over about the toxic world that we live in, the poor nutrition that many of our kids have, and all of this can go into a big aspect of how child development plays out. So after I'd seen that first patient, the first patient that I really got into was a child who had autism and something called infantile spasms, which is a very difficult form of seizure activity. And it turned out that the only real known treatment for infantile spasms is a diet that is a keto diet. This was the first keto diet. Of course, everybody knows about a keto diet now, but it was first discovered at Johns Hopkins University, and a patient of mine had flown back from Johns Hopkins. It was a follow-up appointment locally in Tampa, but they had to go through very carefully because you had to make sure all the nutrition was right and everything. But this kid stopped having seizures, and I was just fascinated. Wow, dietary control can stop somebody from having seizures. That was actually the very first functional medicine thing that I ever learned about. And it really did set me on this path here. So, you never know how things work, but that's what got me here. Okay. Now, first of all, let's talk about the, of course, there was this initial need for awareness. So, of course, we still need autism awareness. But especially as the numbers were growing, we kind of had to grab our head around it because, of course, there are people with autism who speak and people who don't speak, people who have rough behaviors, people who don't. So the part we call it a spectrum because there's this whole spectrum of issues. And, one thing that they have in common to have an autism diagnosis, of course, is there needs to be some type of speech or language communication issue. There needs to be some type of behavioral issue as well. And there needs to be some type of social deficit as well. And, but there could be various levels. Some people could be very strong in some of those subjects and weak in other subjects. But that's what gets together the name of autism and autism spectrum disorders. Okay. Now, with having the understanding of it, one of the things is that families needed to have an understanding about their kids. They to grasp when you have a child who's not developing, a child who's not speaking, who's not making eye contact, who maybe isn't showing reciprocal love, which as a parent must be the hardest thing in the world. To be able to understand, well, this is who my child is, and how can I start to accept and understand what's going on. Now, in addition to that, communities needed to be aware in order to help figure out how to support the families, how to support the children, the types of educational needs that these kids will need, other types of special accommodations. And so, of course, awareness was absolutely necessary for that. And of course, just as people as a whole, it's important to understand what's going on, and to accept that this is happening. Maybe you see somebody who is with a child with autism in a store or something, and you can see that they're having maybe a really rough time. If one's comfortable, and again, kind of acceptance, just like if somebody fell and fell down and hit their head, or fell and hurt their arm, we would go over, we would help them out. Now, we wouldn't necessarily put our hands on a child with autism, but to check in with the parent and say, hey, I'm here for you. Is there anything I can do to help you? Is there anything I can do to support you in this moment? I'm here for you. If not, it's okay also. Right. And that's okay to say. It's okay. Sometimes they don't need that. They're just having a moment. But, the more type of that, with that acceptance of recognizing that we should look at autism similar to a person who has any other medical condition, right? That really changes things around in our mindsets. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about neurodiversity and from that perspective. Now, some people previously used the word neurodivergent. I never was comfortable with that term, even though I actually did use it sometimes because we didn't have better. But the concept of diversity, okay, and this really does speak to the whole spectrum aspect of things, that no two people with autism are exactly alike, and so there's diversity there, and so you have to really understand that autism can present itself in many different forms. But also, it's important to realize that there are some people with autism who are perfectly happy and fine with who they are. They can be successful individuals in school and in life. So just because somebody has autism doesn't necessarily mean that there is something wrong with them. It's something that's different about them, okay? And we know people can go on and become rocket scientists and all types of things. So just because a person has autism, it doesn't mean that we necessarily need to fix them. Okay. Now, granted, some people wish to improve their quality of life, to improve these symptoms, and I'm, of course, all for that. But we shouldn't just assume that that's what a person wants. That's part of the individuality of being part of the self. Now, it's also important to realize that there can be other neurological differences, including autism, in this concept of neurodiversity. So, it's felt that natural variations of human cognition, rather than deficits or disorders, that's kind of a central theme in autism acceptance. So these are variants of normal. Okay. Again, somebody may not think it's normal from absolute observation, but just like with all in the animal kingdom, there's always different variants of of the individual, in the case, and with an animal or in a human being in this case, but that there is, we're not clones. We're not supposed to be all the same. Now, also part of neurodiversity is emphasizing the value of the diverse ways of thinking, of learning, experiencing the world. It in a way, it does challenge traditional medical norms, and we don't want to just make autism. It's not just a pathological state. Incredible musicians, incredible artists, who can do things that I could never imagine doing. We've probably all heard about these more savant type of people who can just do things that most people cannot do, and they're true skills, they're true gifts that many of them have. Um, Now, of course, if a person can't speak, of course, there's some speak, as I said, can way beyond their age. I know kids who are 3 or 4 who are speaking like adults, and it's almost like not normal in that way, but still, it's something, and it could be over too much for a parent if all of a sudden your very young child is asking every single question under the earth and not realizing, hey, I need to stop and wait for an answer, or to engage in a conversation, as opposed to move on to my very next question. So again, that's part of the spectrum as well. There's some kids who can't focus at all. There's some kids who are so hyper focused on this that if they don't complete this particular task, adults as well, I said kids, that they can't even move on. Right. So that's a spectrum as well. Now, in addition to autism, we're talking about things like ADD, ADHD when we're talking about neurodiversity. We're talking about seizure disorders, movement disorders like tics, etc. So that's part of the neurodiversity spectrum as well. Now, next, self-advocacy. Okay, part of acceptance is also for the person themselves, if they can advocate for themselves. Of course, sometimes it needs to be a parent or a guardian or somebody else who is the advocate. But of course, if a person can learn to be a self-advocate for themselves, who knows themselves better than them? Right. So, but there are autistic self-advocacy groups and individuals, coaches, who have played a very important role in promoting this whole concept of autism acceptance, because if one's not able to advocate for themselves, then it's harder for them to be accepted. Right. It's just kind of a natural thing. So any way that we can help people not just learn how to function in society, but even to be able to advocate for themselves, that's really helpful too. But also, it's very empowering. to have a person to be able to speak for themselves. If all along, if and I'll go back to a child situation where a parent is always answering for them, is always, because they know their child so well, they're just going to do for them. But you know what? Just like with when kids get to be teenagers, we still need to be able to have some level of let go to see what can they accomplish on their own. Now, of course, that also means asserting whatever rights they may have. If one isn't able to fully communicate, maybe they need to communicate through typing or through sign language or something. But of course, if you can't make that level of communication and advocating, then of course, be able to stand up for your own rights can be a really big challenge too. And of course, we know that there are very important rights for people of different exceptionalities and special needs, etc. But also, in different environments. So, a person may be very comfortable and communicative in their own home. They may be fine in a situation like going to a supermarket, but it may be too overwhelming for them to go to a ball game, for instance. And now, I know that the Rays here, actually, I think all the sports, they have special accommodations, quieter rooms, places that they can be, like, even like a sensory room. So if a kid, I know that the Rays have this, at Tampa Bay Rays, where if a kid's if it's too overstimulatory out in the stadium, that there's like a sensory room that they can kind of go into and chill out. And those were things that were definitely not happening 10, 20 years ago. So, thankfully these changes are happening live, and that's really great. Okay. And also, part of the whole concept of being able to self-advocate, there's also part of it where really it's also challenging the stereotypes. Autism, many people who, especially adults who have a diagnosis of autism, they were just being labeled as mentally retarded. Okay, which is a term, granted, we don't use anymore, but that's what they were labeled 20, 30, 40 years ago as. And so, these misconceptions that can happen, because again, if you hear a person with autism and you don't know enough, you may think that means that person cannot speak, and you may not even try to speak to that person, when in fact they may be able to just speak fine, but maybe it's the way they pronounce things. Maybe it's some of the other things that may interfere from having a typical social interaction. But still, if we need to be more aware, we need to accept it so we can figure out how can all of us help people with autism, help society, help their families as well. Now, inclusiveness, education, and employment. So I know that there's been this attack against DEI in coming from certain segments of our society here in America. For those who don't know, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay. Now, I recognize that some people don't look at it from this special needs perspective, and they're more looking at it from a race perspective, affirmative action, etc. But I think most people don't realize that it is so far beyond that. Okay. And so, again, I know like Publix, for instance, here in Florida, they do a really good job in finding jobs, whether it's bagging or stocking, whatever, but they make a point to accept and to then move forward and help advocate for them, that they're really, accepting them and help and seeing what potential can they have. They can move up in the store too, in the job ladder as well, because they were given a chance. And that's wonderful. Okay. But as far as DEI itself goes, again, just to be clear what DEI stands for, and again, I'm guessing there's going to be some people who are watching this video who may have said, "Oh, I'm against DEI. We need to vote against it." I know Florida has formally made it pretty much illegal. Universities have had to close DEI programs. But let me read to you the definition of DEI. A term used to describe policies and programs that promote the representation and participation of different groups of individuals. And you know what? That's not just race. That's just not where they're coming from. There's lots to it, and that's where diversity, why we need to be inclusion. So anybody who has an issue with the concept of DEI, I have a strong feeling they probably never looked into what that actually meant, and they just heard amongst their people that they're supposed to be against it. So maybe you can look back into what DEI stands for and find out if that's something you really want to be against. Okay, but again, accepting inclusiveness is, not just for out and about and for work, but also education practices that accommodate diverse learning styles and providing support for autistic students to succeed. Okay, whether it's special seating in a classroom or having an aide in a classroom or a special classroom, but not just putting them into a special classroom, a special unit, leaving there. How do we integrate them? What types of classes can they be brought into the main classroom? Or maybe they can be in the main classroom and get pulled for certain things. But having a bunch of people with autism, just hanging out with people with autism, that's not inclusiveness. That's not helping them prepare to move into the greater society. And again, some people with autism, it is so severe that that's not going to happen. I realize it, but we should give people the benefit of the doubt. We should give them a try. We should continue to reinforce, because it may take many times of reinforcing before they can succeed. We shouldn't be, oh, you can't do it, and just assume that they can't do it. That is not fair. We need to keep on trying. We need to keep pushing. If I went to Japan, I know I'm not going to learn Japanese in a week. Probably not going to learn much in a month, but I may pick some words up. Probably need to be there for a year. So again, we need to be able to give people time to learn skills at their own pace. Okay. And of course, inclusiveness in the workplace as well. As I had kind of alluded to before, people with autism may have very unique strengths. They could have and different perspectives, as I say. They may see things from a different angle, that if they're part of a team, that they that somebody else may not recognize because of the way their uniqueness of their brain is. And so, of course, providing accommodations. There may need to be a separate break room where they can go. They may be only to work so many hours in the office versus doing something at home, etc. But if we don't solicit and figure out what is the best thing for this individual, we're failing. Now, media representation as well. This has improved. We do see more people with autism on TV shows, etc., that are better represented as to what's really are. And of course, having community resources. A lot of communities, organizations, not just the businesses that I mentioned, within counties and stuff. We're learning much more, and they're learning much more about what is needed in order to support people with autism. And of course, how they can connect on different levels, etc. Even like with the police initiative here in Florida, where people with autism can register as having autism, so that and giving a card to if they get pulled over, saying, "Hey, I may not be able to communicate right now, especially under the stressful situation. Please be kind." Those types of things would be very important as well. And of course, that's part of the policy, part of the advocacy. We need to protect the right of people with autism. We need to ensure that they get the health care they need, the education, employment opportunities, etc. And of course, we want to make sure that we can be promoting this across all of society. So overall, obviously, I'm so happy to see that these moves are taking place, and that we can recognize this. And hopefully, as a society, we can really help make people with autism, and they may be able to help us out too. Just kind of give them a chance. All right, well, hope everybody learned something today. Again, if you like this video, please subscribe. Please share it with others. We really want to get this information out. And again, please become a member of Patreon to help support the work that we do. Have a great day.